Hey, this is Annex, and I'm going to go over today, because someone asked me to do a tutorial on this. I'm going to go over how to add an audio clip into Ableton and how to warp it. And because that doesn't take too long to explain, I'll also show how to use that audio clip, the audio sample, once you've warped it in the simpler in Ableton. And I think the simpler is new in Ableton 10. And before there was the sampler, and I think they're very much close to the same thing, but I'm going to use the simpler because it lets you slice by transients among other ways, and it lets you play them out like notes. And I'll also show you how to do that and how it looks on the push, which you can see here. Okay, so I'm going to work today with a vocal clip instead of a song or something, because it's easier just to learn the technique, and we're not making a whole song today. We're just going to go over this little example. So I'm going to go over to the left here, and this is the file I want. This is in one of my folders. You can make like custom folders over here. You just pull them in and Ableton recognizes it, and it's like a shortcut. And this is nice because it indexes everything in the folders, meaning you can search within them. And these folders don't have to be in the, I think it's the user library that Ableton calls it, where all your producing files are. It can be somewhere else on your computer, and I think Ableton will still index it. So here I have under my usable vocals here, these are just little things I downloaded online. I have this one called Olives. And so I looked up, I remember, okay, I have one called Olives, but I want to find it because I have hundreds of vocals. So I just put it in up here and it comes out with it. So I'm going to take this sample and I'm going to pull it into a audio track. And so remember, there's two types of tracks. There's the audio track and a MIDI track. And a MIDI is where you add an instrument and you play through it. And an audio track is where the playing instrument is already recorded. So we're actually going to take an audio sample from an audio track, but we're going to warp it on that audio track, and then we're going to put it into a MIDI track. So the simpler actually works as your instrument. That's pretty interesting. Okay, so I'll let you hear this sample first, and then we'll start to warp it.
I would like a vodka martini, please. Very dry with olives, a lot of olives, like at least 3 olives.
You maybe recognize it's Gwyneth Paltrow. I think that's in Iron Man, if I'm not mistaken, and I think she's drunk. Anyway, so this is the sample I want to use, but like you probably heard, it has quite a bit of background noise, and it has some parts that I don't want to use either. So I want to pull out her voice, and I want to do that in increments that I choose. And I want to get rid of this background noise and the static as much as possible. And I don't want what the little hot dog guy says at the end here. So how do I do that? So once I load it onto the audio track, I'm just going to get rid of these, because they don't matter now. So we're working in this audio track. We open it up here, we double click, and then you see the sample in front of you like this. And the sample is nice already because it goes over 4 bars. Oh, 4 or 2 bars. I think it's
I would like a vodka.
yeah, okay, that shortened it. Let's go back here. So I have a setting on, this is important. So in Ableton, if you go to your preferences and you go to audio, oh, here, no. So it's under record, warp, and launch. So there's a automation setting for when you, here. So when you pull in audio samples, your options, your choices here determine what Ableton does with it automatically. And this can save you time if you're working with a lot of audio samples, or you know exactly that every time you use something, you want it warped immediately. So what I have here is warped one shot. And so warping, to take a step back, it's basically taking an audio sample that's only according to time and is putting it on beats instead. And the benefit of putting it on beats is that you can match it with the beats of your song, and you match the transients with the beats in your song. So otherwise, if you just put a vocal sample on top of a track, so when anyone says anything, it corresponds to notes. So say, for example, you record what I'm saying now, and maybe that's a fun example, maybe we can do that. So we record what I'm saying, and then you would see the waveform here, and it's in two streams because it's stereo. So you see the top waveform and the bottom waveform. If it was in mono, meaning just one channel, it would just be one waveform. Anyway, so what we're doing here is actually fixing the lengths of these different transients, and a transient is any peak, basically. I don't have a very specific definition for you, but it's the peaks that we're going to be working with that matter the most to align the beats up with your bars here. Okay, so going back, so I like to use warped one shot for the short samples. I don't know exactly how Ableton differentiates between what's a short sample and what's a long sample, but a long sample would be something like if you imported an entire song, say if you want to DJ with Ableton or match something in the song. So things that are about 3 minutes or longer, I find, are the long samples. So this is a short sample. I like to warp them. You can, and so okay, there's one shot and there's loop, and loop means once you trigger it, once it gets to the end of the bars over which it covers, it'll come back, and it'll come back indefinitely over the length of those bars. But when it's one shot, it's literally one shot. So you trigger it, it plays, and it doesn't loop back again. Sound effects and things are usually what we use one shots for. But if you have a melody or a drum loop or a synth loop that you want to hear over and over again, then you would want to have a loop. And I don't know how well this auto setting works because I've never used it, so I won't talk about it. And this recording stuff, this is just, so if you have a setup like a microphone or any hardware where you're producing audio and recording audio, because you're not doing that with a push, but you could do it with something like this bass station you see behind me on my piano, then it would be more important to change the record settings up here, just so you get it as close as possible to the bars that you want. Okay, so enough about that. I'm going to close that. So we imported our sample, we put it on a MIDI track, and we see that it was warped already because that's the sample, the settings I had, and it wasn't looped because that's also the default settings that I had. So
I would like a...
Yeah, good. Okay, so that's normal speech. It's not divided by 2 or multiplied by 2, and I don't want to loop it. So next we're going to look at the transients. And Ableton is really good for this, more than other DAWs I've heard, and I've had success with it in Ableton too. So it recognizes the major transients for you, and it shows you this by the little gray triangles there. Get rid of this. The little gray triangles at the top here. And it's doing this to help you find the most important peaks in the audio sample, and then you're using those peaks, like those large differences, to align your track with. So also one thing that helps is just and this is also for when you're taking vocals from a song and you know that it's actually lined up on some sort of beats intentionally already. So I can play this through with a metronome and see how well it lands on each beat. This is a little more difficult with just a vocal sample, obviously, but let's see how it goes.
I would like a vodka martini, please. Very dry, with olives, a lot of olives, like at least 3 olives.
Okay, so maybe I think, there's like 3 or 4 sections here that I want to use, but they aren't cut up into bars yet. So say, for example, I want to have 4 different triggers for this, right here. So the push here should be mirrored on my screen now, but it's really light. Let me try to fix that. So I just turn the LED brightness up, and now you just see a glowing dot anyway. Okay, so we don't want to start with just the first, so we don't want to go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 transients, because those aren't the most important ones. Because although Ableton does a good job of recognizing most of the transients, it doesn't tell you which ones are the most important. So you should start with the major ones first, and then get more specific within those ranges that you create. So I know one was here, so this was kind of my first beat. And when I'm playing the clip here, I'm using my space bar on my keyboard, but it's the same as using this start button that you see over here on the push. So I'm just playing this to start and stop the clip, because that's easy to do that way. Okay, so I have the first transient I found here, and so I want to remember what sound was that.
I would like.
So it's the I would like all together. And I like this sample because she's kind of slurring her words. And when she's slurring her words, it makes it harder to find the transients. So it's kind of fun that way. Okay, so we found our first one here. And because it's at the beginning, we don't have to wait to find another big one, because we can start it from here. And you can also, for now, right click and say set 1, 1, 1 here. And that just means that it's going to start your loop playing, or your sample playing, here at 1 bar. And this 1 bar before was 1.2 bars. It just moved it back forward a quarter bar in time. So now when we play,
I would like
oh, that's really loud.
I would like a.
So now when we play, it starts from this first transient, which we wanted. So there's a difference between this little arrow here, this little right-facing triangle, and the one that's above it. It's this bar. So this one, this little triangle is actually showing where the sample will start. So if I put it here, it'll start here. If I put it here, it'll start here. And the top, this one, is creating your loop. So see, now even though we move the start point, we still have a 4 bar. It would be a loop. And this, sometimes you saw it went red like that. That means it's just like a smidge off of what the bar should be. So that's because it was off a little bit here. And if you touch it, then it fixes itself, more or less. You just have to double check that it's fixed. Okay, it's not fixed. Yeah, so then we just pull it back and we're good. This doesn't make a huge difference if you're just working like in an easy way with one sample at a time here, but when you're actually playing things live, that little bit can make a big difference, like that little error in timing on your bars, and it can throw off everything you play. Okay, so we found the first transient here, and then we say, okay, where's the next spot we want to start with?
I would like a vod.
So the va, I think it's here.
I would like a vod.
This sounds like another important beat. So when I'm talking, the syllables, is it syllables? When I speak, so it's easier to count the syllables because it's the way the language is structured. It helps you divide the words into parts, and those parts are the syllables. And you can think of this the same way, at least that's how it works in English. I don't know how it works in your language. But if you think of this the same way, it's like you're just splitting up the word into beats, like syllable, like how you would count the beats to which you say. You're just doing it in your DAW here. So we're going to press play again and find the next one.
I would like a vodka martini, please. Very dry.
Okay, this very dry, that was really nice. So this was really like very dry. And the syllables that you would hear would be like very dry, I think. But we're ignoring the second syllable because it's not the most important one. It's not the impetus here. So we found this dry. And what I'm doing here, so I'm finding the transients. So whenever I click on one of these ones that Ableton made, it doesn't make a marker yet. It's just going to make a line down here. But when I double click on it, it's going to make a marker, and these markers are what you use to warp back and forth, which we'll do in a second. So yeah, I made this one. I found this one. I said I think this is va or ka or something. So I'm just going to bump it over to right to 2.4 because you see it's just a little bit off, and it's not on anything. I mean, we're not going to have any need for a note to hit exactly here. So I'm just going to bump it over here. And a lot of the time in vocals, they'll start a quarter of the beat after or before the melody or the other things that you're playing. So sometimes you see it like here. So we would start playing the rest of the music at this minus 1.4, and this is if the start is over here, and then the vocals will come in at 1, and that can help so the vocals don't clash with the new notes that are coming in at the beginning of your bar, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're gonna play this again.
I would like a vodka martini, please. Very dry with olives.
So there's a little bit going on here, and it sounds like vodka martini, please. It sounds like we could do that in maybe 16th notes or 32nd notes, but it's a little too small for us to worry about yet, so we're going to come back to that. We can start the sample from here just by clicking up above with this little sound icon.
Olives, a lot of olives, like at least 3 olives.
Okay, so this is another clear syllable, and we can move this one back. So when you move this, it also affects everything that's between this marker and the one before it. When we move it, it doesn't affect the markers that start before the one before it. So it makes anything you do independent, except for what's happening with the surrounding marker. So here there's like a random gap. So I'm just gonna double click here. That's what I did to make this marker, and it made a kind of a stop point. And I'm gonna do that. Oh no, it's okay. So I do that because then when I move this here, so it still squishes this a little bit, but this is some sort of, noise that we want to take out anyway, probably. So this means that when I move this transient, this syllable onto the third bar starting point, that it's not squishing this. So the transient group before it is going to sound more or less the same, which is what I want for now. Okay, so I'm just going to go through the rest pretty quick in the same way.
Olives, a lot of olives, like at least 3 olives. Olives, a lot of olives, like at least 3 olives. I would like a vodka martini, please.
And then we're gonna go in the, so it helps to kind of start from the outside and then work your way in. With this I started left to right, but now I would want to go between these two transients and see, okay, what's a middle point between here, and then find the middle point between that. Say for example, it's this one, so I just pull it to the closest points, and I'm happy that when I do this, it creates this other little transient marker that's right on the bar line here. So I'm just going to pull those over. This one I'm not going to care too much about because it's not very big for one, so the waveform isn't as large as the ones where the transients lie, so this means I won't hear it as much because the waveform is smaller. And it's basically on the line anyway. So if these are a little off, you're not going to notice. So don't pull your hair out taking all of these onto the bars. Also, if you do that and you ever want to change anything, like you'll go crazy because, of how long it takes.
I would like a vodka martini, please.
And then we have here martini, please, or vodka martini, please. Let's just try moving this one up. Okay, good. And then we see this hits on the quarter line. And we have some other stuff going on here. I'm not focusing on here because there's no words of hers there. And over here.
A lot of olives, like at least 3 olives.
and over here. And it sounds like at some point she's saying triplets, and a triplet is something like, so this is 4/4 time.
I would like a vodka martini, please.
Martini, please. So it would be martini, please. And the teeny, please is the triplet note. So in that case, you would want to right-click here and then change to a triplet grid, if you can see that. And then you could take those transients onto the line that corresponds to time signature that's 3/4 over 4/4. I talk about that a little in the last video I did. So if you want to learn more about that, let me know, and you can start by watching the last video. Okay, so say we have our transients more or less lined up. Let's hear how that sounds again, and let's take the metronome on. The metronome is this button up here.
I would like a vodka martini, please. Very dry olives, a lot of olives, like at least 3 olives.
Okay, so you can hear already that sounds a lot more soothing, pleasing to the ear, because it aligns well to your beat. Okay, getting out of setup. So now that I imported my audio sample, I warped it. And if I say wrap instead of warp, it's because I'm probably dyslexic and I can't remember what it's called all the time. So yeah, if I make that mistake, it means the same thing to me. Okay, so now I want to take this audio sample that we warped and I want to move it into a MIDI so I can play it. And the MIDI instrument I'm going to use, and I think, I know the simpler is specific to Ableton. Yeah, so here we have simpler and we have sampler. And for some things, if I want to import like a kick, if I'm using somebody's kick, then I can use the sampler. This is just a small aside. And when you pull in the kick here, you send the scale from 100% to 0%, and that stops pitching the kick. This is more relevant if you're putting in an attack of a kick, like the talk, like the first like boom you hear, not the bass after it, but the first like oomph. You don't want that to be changing notes. You want that to be kind of, not atonal, but not to have a changing note associated with it. But in Frenchcore, you do want to have the rest of the kick changing notes. Anyway, so when you import the talk here, if you're using this for a kick, you just set the scale to 0% and your talk won't change scales. I think maybe I'll do another tutorial on a kick because there's so much to talk about there. So that's the only reason I use sampler, because that's something you can't do in simpler. So here's the simpler. When I pull the instrument onto this open space, it says drop files and devices here. It either creates a new audio track or a new MIDI track, depending on what you're pulling over. And in this case, it's the MIDI track. So it made one and it called it simpler. Another cool thing is if you click on the top of these tracks and you go Control R, so we did that last time, but this number here, it means that wherever you move this track to, Ableton's going to recalculate which track number it is and rename it accordingly for you here. So you don't have to go back one by one to renumber your tracks if you do it that way. Okay, so here's the simpler. And we have this instrument down here. I hope it's big enough for you to see. And now this instrument is empty. And there's 3 different options you can use in the simpler. One is classic, which I think means you can loop it as well. This one shot is just straightforward, and slicing is what we're gonna use today. And it's also what the push is better for. So we're taking this sample and we're dropping it right into here, and I'm pretty sure it does it with the warped sample and not the original audio sample. But if it sounds weird, then we have to go back and change that. Okay, so now it's on classic mode, so we're gonna turn this off, and we're gonna go down to the notes on our push to make it a little easier. So now we're in session view on the push, and I want to click note here. So you see this little box. I'm clicking note on the bottom left-hand corner of that box. I'll tell you why in a second. Okay, so now any note I push is going to start playing this audio sample. And
I would like a vodka martini, please.
And the way, okay, so this is the benefit of classic, is it actually pitches things for you. And it's pitching them to the scale that you set. So I think that the default scale on the push is the C major. Let's go in A minor because that's what we used in our last tutorial. So I went to, I went to scale here on this little quadrant, and I'm going up to the top, and I'm pressing A on the top row here, maybe, yeah, here. So I'm pressing A, and then I'm switching from major to minor by turning that first knob. Sorry, it's difficult to get this as like a decent setup and have all the cameras rolling too. Okay, so we switched it to the A minor scale, and now we're gonna go back to that. And what I did here is I clicked device. So I went up to this quadrant here. You see device, mix, browse, and a clip. And I click device, and then once I do that, you see the device here. And the device in this circumstance is your simpler. And yeah, as I mentioned, now this is in the scale of A minor. So all of these roots are A minor in different, different octaves. We can find out where, so this one's A2, this one's A3, and you can watch my last tutorial where I talk about that more. So I'm not going into that now. That sounds like Darth Vader. So I'm not trying to pitch her voice now because I don't want to do anything really musical with it. If you were using an audio sample, that's kind of a fun way to play around with audio samples, and it also makes it your own because it's not good to steal other or use other people's samples without modifying them and making them your own necessarily. Okay, so we have our simpler, and I don't want to pitch her voice because she already sounds funny enough. So then we're gonna go from classic to see, what does one shot here do? Okay, so it still pitches. Great, so I don't want that anyway. So what we're gonna do here is go to slice, and the slice isn't pitching at all. So meaning the key or whatever sounds you put in, they'll sound the same coming out. You're just gonna cut them up in a different way than they're presented. So these are the transients that it makes its best guess on. They're not exactly the same as the transients we found here. So if you do something like this, and you just want to play like fast and easy over some nice melody or something, you can just break it up into sections. So then you could say like, this is my first section. I go Control D to duplicate and pull this over and say this is my second section, and pull it over again after I Control D and say this is my third section. And in this way you could just say, I'm going to session view for a second. So you see here, hopefully, these purple columns here, they align to these three samples. So you could play sample 1.
I would like a vodka martini, please. I would like a vodka martini, please. I would like a...
Okay, and same with the second one.
Dry olives, lot of olives.
And here I want to pull the start here.
Very dry olives, lot of olives. Very dry olives.
So that's on a loop, and then the same for the third one.
At least 3 olives. At least three olives.
And you can re-trigger them as you want. So they're just going to take 1 bar from when you trigger to when it sends the output. So that's an option instead of simpler, but we're going to go back to simpler. And here it's guess the transients. So there's different options of how to slice your sample. The default one, so that's why it came up first, the default one is these transients. Let's see if I can move this down here. Move this up a bit. So this is the 1, 2, 3. The third knob from the right here is it says slice by, and it says transients is pre-selected. You can also slice by beats. So I'm just turning that knob here, and it does it on, yeah, maybe quarter notes or something. Right now I'm going to go to this wrap button, see at the bottom right on our computer screen here, and I'm going to press it. So then everything makes a little more logical sense. And it does seem like it used the wrap sample that we did for the first track here. So that's good. That's why it lines up a little bit better on these bars. Let's see how this sounds. So we're on our session, on our push, we're going to go back to the note view. I actually have this on a sweater behind it, so it's a little elevated, and I find that helps me. So you see here on the bottom left of the push, I'm going to change color actually. So I think pink might be better. Yeah, okay. And then it helps because, yeah, you can tell the difference between these better. So on our push here, now we're in the note view. So we're not in the session view, we're not in the note, we're in the note view. And we selected this track, and we've also armed this track. So this red thing is on, and that means when I press something on the push, it's going to send the signal to this track, specifically to track 2, as long as your push is set up correctly and its monitor is either on auto or in. If it's on off, it won't do anything. So we put it on auto, and we see how this works first with beats, and then we'll go to transients. Okay, so it's starting at 1.4 here, minus 1.4, but that doesn't matter for us. So you can hear what this little increment sounds like. So this first little quarter bar stretch by pressing the bottom left note here on your push. So every chopped up bit, every segment here corresponds to one note on your push. And it goes in order from left to right. And when you hit the end of the right row, the row on the right, you go up one to the left, I believe. So I'll just show you how that works.
I would like the
And when I'm so another important thing is in playback. So these won't overlap when they're in mono. So mono means that if I play one thing, it's going to stop the second I play the next thing, I believe. So triggering the second note here, triggering the second segment, is going to stop the first one from playing. So it depends what you want to do with your sample. Poly. So if it sounds like there's 100 of her. If it's on poly, it lets you kind of trigger samples over each other, and they're going to have their own space. They're not going to cut each other off. They're not going to push each other around. So if you're on through, so we'll say start at bar 3 here.
At least 3 olives.
It goes right to the end. So it doesn't stop at bar 3.2 as if we were doing the mono. Great. So we could tell here that it's kind of not broken up into the right combinations, the right sections that I want it to be.
I would like
Because here it splits up Mar and Teeny, and we don't want that. So we're going to go to transients instead. So we're going to slice by, instead of slicing by beats here, and the division here, this is quarter notes, so that's why it's dividing it into, literally every quarter bar is a new segment, which you could change it to 16th notes or 16th note triplets if you're on the 3/4 time signature. That's, the T denotes the triplet, and it's the same on your push when you, oh god, that's a lot of triggers. It's the same as the push when you see the trigger buttons here with on repeats. Maybe you can see it says 1/4, 1/4 T, 1/8 T. This would mean a quarter note, a third note. So yeah, I don't know why they don't just say 1/3, but anyway, you just have to learn it. Okay, so we don't want that. We want to slice by transients, as I said. What we basically did first to start is we did it manually. Oh, on this option, you double click the same as we did in this view, in this audio track. But I believe here you can't stretch the sample, so you can't actually warp the sample in the MIDI instrument in the simpler. You have to do that in the audio. So that's the benefit of first doing it in the audio and then pulling it over because it's cleaner and it's more on the beats. Okay, so we're not doing that because we already did it. We're gonna slice it by transient. And it also makes a best guess here about where the transients are, the same as it did here in our original sample before these were yellow markers. So we're going back to here and we're looking at our simpler. Yeah, I wish I could make it bigger for you, but I don't know how. Maybe I do. Yes, there. And you're not squinting at your phone. Okay, so we're going by transients and we see on the push here, so we remember again, every one of these notes here basically is what they are. They correspond to one of these segments and we're going left to right and from the bottom to the top. And these over here are because we ran out of space up here. So it goes in groups of 4 all the way to the top and then it'll go back over here again. And the push is nice because it's all in squares basically. So there's like squares within squares and like matrices within matrices. So this is 4 by, what is it? 4 by 8, and this is one section, and then this is a similar section again that's 4 by 8, and it builds the same way from the bottom to the top. Okay, so what do these sound like now? It looks like they're probably way too busy. I'm gonna switch this from mono to poly. Yeah, so this doesn't really do anything for us. And something like this, like, it's useless. It's not gonna help us at all unless we want like some dreamy sound effect, but that's not the reason why we're using this sample. We want the sample for like a clear, strong vocal. Even though she's drunk, we want to make it clear. So we're gonna move these transients and get rid of some of them. First, we're gonna move the start point, this little arrow guy on the left, we're gonna move it right to 1, because remember we decided we want to start there. And you can zoom in and zoom out with the magnifying glass here. You click on the bar line and you pull down to zoom out, and you pull the mouse up to zoom, down to zoom in and up to zoom out. And it's the same on your push. I hope you can see that a little bit. So anything you do on the session view here in your instrument, it should be mirrored in the push. So here we have the start point that we just moved, and on the push you can maybe see that it looks the same now. So this little part is moving when we move it here. And the benefit of this push is you can go in and do it by hand. So you can go through, I think, this is the start here, and this is the same as if we were using it with the mouse. I'm not very quick at that yet, and for the purpose of explanation, I'm not going to talk about it much, because here you're learning the mechanism of how this instrument works first, and not necessarily how to tweak it on the push. And I recommend you, I think, learn it this way first. That helped me more, and then I translate what I knew there to what I can do on the push, because then I'm not learning 2 things at once, and it was less confusing. Okay, so we're here, we set our start points, and we double check to say this is, actually I can move this over now, sorry. And this is our start, okay, that's good. And and this is weird. So we're gonna take out this transient, and you just double click on it to take it out. Oh, one other thing, it's guessing so many transients here because the sensitivity is set to 100%. You can not increase it obviously, but you can decrease it. And by decreasing it, you're removing those transients that weren't as prominent. And if you remember the example before, this would be like, yeah, say like letters in a word that don't land on the right syllable. So it would be things in between that are not as important, that we don't care if our beat matches up to it. And we're definitely not going to start something in the middle of the word martini. So we're going to reduce the sensitivity a bit here, actually quite a bit here. See what that gives us. And you can just, yeah, go through your push and play them from left to right. Okay, that's weird. So we're going to get rid of this one.
A vodka martini, please. A vodka martini, please.
Let's separate please from vodka martini. So we're double clicking to make a new marker, and we're putting it here. I'm gonna get rid of these markers. So I'm just again double clicking on the little triangle at the top here to get rid of them, and to make one I double click. So it's the same thing to get rid of one as to make one.
A vodka martini.
Okay.
A vodka martini.
Okay, so it's playing through because we have it set on poly, and that's why it keeps going to the end of the sample and across those next notes. And the next notes would be like
very dry, olives, very dry,
like the ones that come after, and that's why she keeps talking. But if we went to mono again, it would cut off that sample.
Olives, lot of olives.
Anyway, so on the push, as you can probably see, when you press the square, when you press the button, it changes color hue, and then you can kind of remember where you were also in your workflow. What do we want here?
Dry.
Okay, very dry is fine. We're going to get rid of these transients.
Olives, lot of olives.
This, okay, so this is a good example of something that we're just going to ignore. We're not going to we can't cut out sections with this simpler, just the same way like you can't cut it out in an audio file really. If you do want to cut out sections, a trick. So how you do it is go over to your arrangement view. So here I'm just pressing tab to change the view here. And I'm going to find my sample again. I'm going to pull it in. Oh, you can't see that anymore. So I'm going to pull that sample in here to an audio track that's in arrangement view. So basically it's just drag and drop. This is grayed out because we're playing in session view and not in arrangement view, but to get the gray to go away, you press this orange play button here. This means play in arrangement view. And you spread it out to see what it looks like. Sorry. And say you want to get rid of this totally random stuff. So I want to make a smaller grid increments, say like 132, or I could even go off to do it freeform. I press the spot at the end I want to stop at. I do Control E and that creates a cut. And here again I go Control E and that makes another cut. So here we have 3 audio samples instead of 1. Then we select the middle one we want to delete and we just press delete. And then you can put it back together again any way you want. So say I wanted to pull this over and I wanted to have a little overlap, so yeah, so the difference wasn't so big. And then I can select both of them and go Control J and it consolidates them. So that's how you can get rid of really large areas of silence.
Very dry.
So here you don't see that.
A vodka martini, very dry.
Yeah, we cut off a bit of the martini, but you get the idea. We get rid of a lot of that empty air that we don't want, because if we keep that in, it's gonna make the rest of our mix muddy and it just doesn't help us. But an alternative to that, and this is why I was going over that, let me show you the simpler again. So we went back to session view, we press tab to get out of the arrangement view. And we see the simpler again on the bottom. So we had this spot here that we didn't really care for. Or
very dry, please.
Let's use the same section that we just took out so it's a bit more clear. So after this,
Please. Very dry.
this transient was not on, and that's why it was grayed out. So about from, this is useless for us, this section. And that's the section we just cut out, remember, in arrangement view. So I'm double clicking here on the beginning of the spot I don't want, and I'm again double clicking on the ends at the spot I don't want. And I'm just gonna make a mental note, or I see some people put like sticky notes on their push and on their hardware to remember. Just whatever works for you. I'm gonna remember that I don't want to press this note. Yeah, I think there's a way to actually color your notes on the push, but I don't remember that. So if anyone can tell me how, that would be nice. I guess you could make the ones you don't want to use like gray or black, and the ones you want to use like red or green or something. So that's why we still keep that in here, but we just make transients around it.
Very dry. Very.
And this is interesting to note. So this is repeating when I hold this down, because I put this repeat on to show you. We have repeat and accent on the right hand side. We're looking at the push now, and the repeat is on with the 1/8 notes selected. So that means it's going to repeat at 8th note increments.
Very.
And that's why it stops halfway through this, well, a little less than halfway through this random bar difference. And that's why it's not playing all the way through here, because this is more than 1/8 of a bar.
Very.
But these repeats are also interesting because you can change them when you're playing. Make some speedcore and nice things. And you can just record that too. I'll show you that in a sec. Okay, so there's all these, yeah, you just go through painfully transient by transient. Actually, it doesn't take too long once you get the hang of it. Just figure out what you want and what you don't want and make a conscious effort to keep those or get rid of those. So let's say we're just gonna get rid of these.
At least 3
Oops, we're still on repeat, so I'm just gonna press repeat to turn that off. We're gonna cut her off at the end.
At least 3 hours. At least 3 hours. At least 3 hours. At least 3 hours.
Okay, and we have the beginning.
I would like a vodka martini. Please. Very dry. Olives, lot of olives, at least 3 olives.
Okay, so that's more or less, you get the idea. So now we want to record and see how this looks when we play. So we basically made an instrument out of this audio clip, and the instrument doesn't play itself, you have to do the work for it. So we have some parts that we wanted to keep of that and some parts that we didn't. And I think there's 2 of these buttons that I didn't want to use. So let's see where we are in the range of keys here. Okay, so we're on C1. I guess they start from C1 and move up with these notes because it doesn't really matter, where they are. So now you can go C1 to whatever, C9, whatever's at the top if you want to make an infinite number of transients. Okay, so
I would like,
this is our first
I would like,
segment, and we want this one. So
I would like,
we're gonna hold this here, and we see this red here. I'll zoom out a little bit for you. So you see this red, when we press the button, we see how it corresponds on the MIDI. And we have our note here. I double clicked to make a note, and it goes in automatically with the distance for what you set as the grid. So these are 16th notes, so every time I double click, it makes a new 16th note, and you can do that anywhere, whatever. Okay, so we want this first segment.
I would like,
And to double check that we got the right thing, we go up here to this little preview button, these little headphones.
I would like, I would like, I would like.
And this means when we select it, we can preview how it's going to sound without having to play the whole clip. So you hear that was a bit louder than we had before. When you input things into Simpler, it takes the volume a lot down. But remember here we reduced it to -12 because it was too loud. So we can reduce it a little bit here too. With some things, like if I'm using the tail of a kick in the Simpler, so the tail is the one that I want to have a pitch to it, a different key to it, depending on which note I press, then I would increase the volume because I don't want it to be artificially lowered. Okay, so we're going back here. So we're just going to figure out what notes we want, and let's say I want this over a 4-bar chord. So here I'm selecting this. Oh, you don't see that. I can zoom out now because we're not looking at the Simpler dead in the face anymore. Okay, so you see I pulled it, I made it longer. I increased the length from 1 bar to 4 bars by clicking on this length and moving up. So I'm pressing down with my cursor and I'm moving it up. And it's the same things if you, change this. So I want to do a 4-bar loop. Most of the stuff you do live, it's going to be like 4 or 8 bar loops. In simple words. So we have the first one here, and say I want to have that as like I would like to have that as a half note here. So we pull it out to 1.3 bars, and then we think, okay, what's the next segment that we want? Okay, and this good doesn't sound very good. It's good. So I'm going back to the Simpler, and I'm going to add another transient after the g. And that makes like a little illegal button again that I don't want to push. Or maybe I do, depending on what I want. But right now I don't, because I just want her words. So I got rid of that, and I made a new transient. And when you do that, you have to remember that you did it and change your notes accordingly. Because if I made a note wanting the whole thing here, and then I added a new transient, it's going to add a new note, but then push all the notes after up 1. So sometimes you have to readjust what you have. So I don't want this one. This was the illegal one, so I want the next one up. So I'm just going to pull this one up. And to preview it, we go up here and just press, my cursor's up here, and just press play.
Very dry olives, a lot of olives.
Oh, and it's on
At least 3 olives.
mono.
I would like a vodka martini.
Oh, okay. So we had this track in session view, and that's what we're hearing. So I'm just going to turn that off or delete it, whatever, just so we don't hear that. That's why you had the duplicate. So I'm back, arrangement view. So I'm back in session view.
I would like a vodka martini.
And then we want please, of course.
Very dry.
Please, please, please. And then it's after D. It's on D sharp. And it's a little shorter. And let's let's just go in and add some of the other words we want.
Very dry. Very dry. Olives, lot of olives. Like olives, lot of olives. Like at least three olives.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, we're not going to do a 4-bar loop. We're going to do a 2-bar loop because she doesn't have that much to say, actually. So now that you have your notes down here, let's just play it out and see how it sounds.
I would like a vodka martini, please. Very olives, at least three.
Yeah, okay, it's not perfect, but that's not the point. So these are a little bit long because we have some dead air in them, some empty space. And let's just see what happens if we cut them into...
I would like a vodka, please. Very olives, at least three olives.
Okay, that's fine. We lost...
A vodka, please.
Yeah, we lost martini, but just pretend that's what you want. And we lost that because we have it set on mono. If we had it on poly and we played again,
I would like a vodka martini, very olives, lot of olives.
then we hear that vodka martini still, because we didn't lose it, because it's just playing through and it's not stopped by the next button. This is the same if you're making a drum rack. So I'm not an expert on this, but when you're making a drum rack and you're setting them up by hand, you can change the relationship between the drums, meaning if you hit one, it'll choke the other one out. So obviously when you're playing drums, some of them stop the other ones from playing. I guess I'm not a drummist. So it depends, yeah, if you want two things to be overlapping each other, or if you want to go one, then the next one, then the next one. And if it's one and the next one and the next one, how do you want that to happen? Okay, so we have our notes here.
I would like a vodka, please. Very olives, at least three olives.
Sure, whatever. So this is how you, let me show you just another thing. So the benefit of this push is to play it out. So we're gonna record something. We're gonna put our metronome on here. And we have this armed, and we're gonna press the record button on the push. And just record a little bit, like a jam session with Gwyneth Paltrow. It counts as in. Okay, whatever. Obviously, you would be a lot more careful about that if you're actually doing this for a purpose. So, see, it records those notes here, and it's also recording the velocity down here, and that's because I don't have this accent bar that's beside the accent button that's beside this repeat button right here. This is not, the accent button's not pressed, so that means it's gonna record how hard I push each one of these, and how the harder I push it, the higher the velocity is. So it recorded these notes. I press fold. I tried to get the notes on the beats, so, or some sort of beats, I guess, when this metronome was going, and that means you have less work to do to adjust it. You can pull in the fronts and start it at the beginning of your first note here, set 1 1 1, and then go to play it out, and it'll sound the same. So I'm just pressing play, and it's going to play this one because it's, this clip is already green here.
I would like very olives, very at least three olives.
Great. So I hope you see what you can do in theory with this simpler, and it can be pretty fun, but it can be kind of time consuming too. You just have to, yeah, get better at it. So what do we do here? So we took a sample we wanted to use. It was just a speech sample, but you can use any songs or melodies or singing lines you want. So we pulled it in to an audio track, and we opened it up, and we found the transients that Ableton made. Then we went into the most important transients, and those were the ones with the highest peak here, kind of where the syllables land, the important parts. and we pulled those onto the major markers. And because we're doing EDM or some sort of electronic music, those are going to be on on quarter, eighth, or 16th note intervals. And I want the major transients to be on the bigger intervals, say on 1, 1.5, 1.25, rather than like some 1.2.3. I wouldn't put a major syllable here because it just throws off the groove of your whole thing. So we did that. We were happy with that. Then we pulled it into 3 sections that we could play with, going back to session view on my push here, that we could play by triggering in session view with a push. And then we wanted to be a little more creative. So we pulled that audio sample into a track that we loaded a simpler on. And the simpler is new in Ableton 10. So Ableton 9, you might not have it. And I don't think you can do this with the sampler. So yeah. There's other things here, so you can change the attack and delay and sustain envelope, which is interesting for a little more fine-tuning. You wouldn't really do this for just a vocal sample like this, so I'm not going to go into that. So we saw what the classic did, we saw what one shot did, so these are where I'm going to go back to note. So these are where you pitch, like Alvin and the Chipmunks. This sounds pretty good. Same with one shot, but we wanted to slice it. So first we started slicing it on the beats, and remember everything that I showed you on the screen, you can also do here. So you can do it by hand, actually by turning these knobs on top of your push. But just for the sake of explanation, I didn't do that. So we started with a quarter note beat divisions, and then I wanted to make my own transients. So I switched it from slice by beat to slice by transient. And then I reduced the sensitivity from 100 to, about whatever, 71, just to get rid of all of those, all of those kind of random mini transients that Ableton adds. Like, these are not interesting to me, but that's still what it picks up depending on the sensitivity. So I did that by double clicking to either make or remove a transient marker. And I also changed the start of the sample to where I wanted it to be. So I think, that's all I want to cover today. If you want to know more about something, if it's related to like hardcore Frenchcore music, which I haven't done a tutorial on actually, but these get more interest, I think. So the general production ones with Ableton, I think, are more interesting for now. But let me know in the comments what you want to learn, and maybe I can teach you it. Thanks.